Alabama Annie, and welcome to part 28 of the Starlight Tavern. It was one Friday afternoon in early March when Lenny and I came home from school to find a strange car parked in the driveway of the tavern. After stopping for a moment in the kitchen, Lenny sat down with Uncle John to eat a sandwich, and I ran into the dining room to see who was there and to show Aunt Mary my arithmetic grade. I was very proud of it. I found Aunt Mary sitting with a man in the parlor. He was dressed in a nice suit and tie. He had a bushy mustache, kind of like Mr. Harry's, and looked friendly for the most part. He stood when I came into the room as Aunt Mary smiled at me and looked over my school paper. She exclaimed that she was very proud of me for making that B, because I'd been struggling with my math. And then she introduced me to Charlie Teal. Charlie's an old friend of Robert's and mine, she'd said, and I was relieved that she hadn't called him Uncle. He smiled at me. "It's nice to meet you," he said, as Aunt Mary announced that he was going to be renting a room from us for a while. And I recognized right then that it was happening again. I could see the looks that passed between them, and I knew Charlie Teal was most likely Aunt Mary's new boyfriend. I tried to be polite. I shook his hand and said it was nice to meet him, and then he said something else, and just then, though, Miss Hattie called me. I ran to the kitchen. I held the screen door open for her as she came in with a basket of fresh eggs from the hen house, and I showed her my math grade, and she said I'd done a great job. Lenny said he had to write a report over the weekend on Abe Lincoln and frowned, pulling out his notebook and pen, as Uncle John leaned back in his chair and began telling him all about the great emancipator, the man who had given his own grandmother her freedom, and I got busy on my science. When Uncle John was done talking about Lincoln, I asked him about fossils. And Lenny said, "Oh, I have a book on them," and he ran back to our room to get it. Aldous had given him the book at Christmas. As Uncle John changed topics to the limestone formations on Lookout Mountain, while I listened and made notes, I noticed Hattie didn't look very happy. She wasn't smiling like she normally did, and I thought maybe she might not be feeling well. I wondered, though, if it had anything to do with our new boarder. After Aunt Mary and Mr. Charlie Teal went out somewhere for dinner that night, we ate our meal in the kitchen, and the subject of our guests came up while Hattie only picked at her food. Uncle John looked at her. "I can tell you're not happy he's back," he said, as Lenny asked who they were talking about, but they ignored him. "Charlie Teal's always been trouble when he was around with Robert, all that drinking and gambling, and remember that fight they got into that you had to break up?" Uncle John said if I hadn't broken up the fight, there wouldn't have been a dish left in the house. I looked across at Miss Hattie and was about to ask her a question when Lenny asked it for me. "Is he Aunt Mary's new boyfriend?" he asked, as John chuckled, tousling his hair. "Looks like he is, son, that damned old scoundrel, and I can say I'm not very happy he's back either." A couple days later on Saturday, I came into the kitchen just as Aunt Mary and Miss Hattie were having one of their discussions. I didn't interrupt them. I had just come in to get a glass of water while I was doing my weekly chores, but of course I overheard what they were saying. "I was just about to ask if you wouldn't mind baking Charlie a cake for his birthday tomorrow, that's all," Aunt Mary remarked. Hattie stopped what she was doing and put her hands on her hips. "I suppose I could if you really want me to, but I just have to tell you that none of us are all too happy he's back. And we're trying to hang on to our sugar and flour and eggs for guests, you know. Things are tight." Miss Hattie reminded Aunt Mary about all the problems he'd caused over the years, all that business about him doing time in jail for some robbery he claimed he hadn't done, and all of the other drunken binges he and Robert had gone on. Aunt Mary waved a hand in the air, as if to brush her words aside. "Oh, Hattie, That was a long time ago, and Charlie didn't come here to cause any trouble. It's all just water under the bridge now, she said. He's served his time, and as far as I'm concerned, he deserves the benefit of the doubt. But Hattie put one hand on her hip again and pointed the other fingers at her and gave Aunt Mary one of her looks. "You're the queen of denial right now, Miss Mary," she said. "So if I gave you some advice, would you take it, or am I just blowing hot air?" "I doubt you will, but I'll try anyway," she said, rolling her eyes as Aunt Mary stood waiting with her arms crossed. "Just say it then, Miss Hattie." Hattie put both hands on her hips and pointed toward the living room. "That man in there is nothing but trouble, and you mark my words, he didn't come here to visit. He's hiding out, or he wants something, and if it's what you have, why, he'll take it from you the first chance he gets, I guarantee, and you'll live to regret ever having him here again." Hattie opened the cabinet and pulled out the mixing bowl from the shelves and slammed it down on the table so hard I thought it was going to break. And without another word, I went into the pantry and brought her out the flour and the sugar and a couple of eggs and the cocoa from the pantry and the vanilla. Hattie didn't even look at me as I sat them down on the table beside the bowl. "Now, what do you want, devil's food or what?" she asked Aunt Mary. Aunt Mary mumbled that she didn't care what kind of a cake it was, as long as it was a cake and it had layers and some icing. "Chocolate it is," Hattie snorted, shaking her head. Then she turned to me. "Why don't you make the cake?" "I don't want to have any part of this," she said, walking out of the kitchen and through the back door before another word was said, so I got busy. I knew Miss Hattie needed to blow off some steam. The next day, Mary, Myra, Carl, and Patsy surprised Charlie Till with the cake, and we begrudgingly celebrated with him. Uncle John or Harvey didn't join the festivities, and Miss Hattie was somewhere else conveniently, but Mr. Harry did pop over from the hotel for a slice of cake, and I had a piece of it too. But when Charlie Till asked me to give him a birthday hug, I flatly refused and pulled away from him. "What's the matter with you, little girl?" he asked as I tried to go out of the room when Aunt Mary caught me by the arm. "You go and give your Uncle Charlie a birthday hug," she ordered, and then I yanked my sleeve away and said, "No, you give him a hug yourself." I walked out to the kitchen, and thank goodness she didn't come after me. I went over to the sink and started washing dishes so that Miss Hattie wouldn't have to clean up from my cake baking. I think Charlie knew nobody much wanted him there, but he stayed anyway, adding to the burden of everything being so tight and in short supply. He ate his fill at meals. He never once offered to lift a hand to help anyone do anything, and Miss Hattie began calling him King Charlie under her breath. What irritated me most about him was that we all did our chores around the tavern, except for him. Since he'd taken that room upstairs, he'd sit there in a chair reading the newspaper or getting in the way while I was trying to clean around the place, and he was always nosing around to see what I was doing or asking me to bring him something, and I hated going upstairs even more than I had before because he was there. I kept hoping the ghost would chase him down the stairs and he'd fall and break his neck or something, but he didn't. He didn't seem to notice them at all, and Aunt Mary had given me strict instructions not to disturb him or his room. She said he had a lot of valuable things in his room that he'd brought along with him, and of course that made me curious. But it was a long time before I finally got up the nerve or had the chance to go snooping. But when I did, it changed everything for all of us, and it caused a lot of trouble too. If Charlie happened to be outdoors lazing on the porch, he'd start off by discussing what Uncle John or Harry were doing, giving them advice when he didn't know anything about what they were doing. He never offered to step in and help, to trim the roses or cut the grass, and he steered clear of the kitchen. That was a good thing. He didn't want to butt heads with Hattie, and I could tell Aunt Mary didn't like the way Hattie called him King Charlie under her breath, or the way I acted around him. She said I disrespected Charlie, but Lenny and I thought it was funny when he'd get upset over something and the veins in his neck would stand out and his mustache would twitch like a cat's whiskers. Lenny and I would break out laughing, and sometimes we'd go out of our way to make that happen. One time, he and Aunt Mary had been sitting on the front porch with some of our guests on a warm February afternoon sipping from a bottle of whiskey, and when it got to be dinner time, the couple they'd been talking to had strolled off to the hotel across the road for dinner, and Charlie and my aunt had gone inside for a moment, and when Lenny and I came home after going on a hike, we happened to come up on the bottle of whiskey sitting beside the two rocking chairs. We thought it would be great fun to hide it, so we hid it behind a big flower pot beside those chairs. Then we ran around the porch to the dining room side and waited for them to come back, and when they did, Charlie shouted, "Where the hell is my whiskey?" Aunt Mary said she didn't have any idea and suggested maybe our guest had come back for the bottle to take it with them to dinner. And old Charlie got so mad, he kicked one of the rocking chairs over the rail of the porch and slung the table off as well into the bushes, while my aunt tried to calm him down, holding up the bottle when she spied it behind the flower pot. "Why, here it is," she said. "You must have left it here."